Marcus Henderson never expected his morning jog through London's Hyde Park would change everything. The 32-year-old construction worker had been running the same route for 3 years, always passing by the ornate gates of Buckingham Palace, where the Queen's Guard stood motionless in their iconic red uniforms and towering black bearskin hats. That particular Tuesday morning, something was different. As Marcus rounded the corner near the palace gates, he witnessed a scene that made his blood boil. A tourist was aggressively shoving his phone into a guard's face, shouting obscenities when the soldier refused to break protocol and smile for photos. The guard remained perfectly still, eyes fixed straight ahead, but Marcus could see the slight tension in his jaw. "Bloody tourists," Marcus muttered, slowing his pace. He watched as more people gathered, some laughing at the tourists' antics, others pulling out their own phones to record the harassment. The guard couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't defend himself. He was trapped by duty and tradition. Marcus had always respected the guards. His grandfather had served in the military during World War II, and stories of honor and service had been drilled into him since childhood. Seeing this young soldier being humiliated for entertainment struck something deep within him. Later that evening, Marcus sat in his small flat in East London, scrolling through social media. Video after video showed tourists harassing the Queen's Guard, trying to make them laugh, break character, or react. The comments were even worse, with people calling the guards useless, robots, and worse. Marcus felt his anger building with each post. It was then that Marcus remembered Rex, his 2-year-old German Shepherd mix he'd rescued from a shelter 6 months earlier. Rex was incredibly intelligent, but had behavioral issues from his previous life on the streets. Marcus had been working with a local dog trainer to help Rex overcome his aggressive tendencies, particularly his habit of barking at strangers and lunging when he felt threatened. The idea hit Marcus like lightning. What if he could train Rex to protect those who couldn't protect themselves? What if his dog could become an unofficial guardian for the guards who were bound by protocol to remain silent and still? Marcus spent the next few days researching everything he could about the Queen's Guard protocols, their schedules, and the common harassment they faced. He learned that the guards were real soldiers, with real military training, not tourist attractions. They carried loaded weapons and were responsible for protecting the royal family, yet they were treated like statues by ignorant visitors. The more Marcus learned, the more determined he became. He contacted his dog trainer, Sarah Williams, and explained his unusual request. Sarah was initially skeptical, but Marcus's passion and Rex's potential convinced her to help develop a training program. They started with basic protective commands. Rex already had strong territorial instincts, but they needed to be refined and controlled. The goal wasn't to create an attack dog, but rather a deterrent that could sense when someone was being inappropriate or aggressive toward a guard. Sarah explained that dogs could read human body language and energy in ways humans often missed. Rex could be trained to recognize the signs of escalating aggression or disrespect and position himself as a barrier between the harasser and the guard. Marcus began taking Rex to busy public spaces, teaching him to identify when someone was behaving aggressively or inappropriately toward others. They practiced in parks, shopping centers, and tourist areas, with Sarah playing different roles to test Rex's responses. The training was intense and demanding. Rex had to learn to distinguish between normal tourist curiosity and genuine harassment. He had to remain calm and controlled while still being protective. Most importantly, he had to respond only to Marcus's commands and never act independently. After weeks of preparation, Marcus felt ready for their first real test. He planned to take Rex on his morning jog past Buckingham Palace, not to interfere initially, but to observe and see how Rex reacted to the environment and the interactions between tourists and guards. As they approached the palace gates that first morning, Marcus's heart pounded with nervous excitement. Rex trotted beside him, alert and focused, his training evident in his controlled posture. Several tourists were already gathering near the guards, phones ready, hoping to capture something entertaining for their social media feeds. Marcus slowed to a walk, pretending to stretch while watching the scene unfold. A group of teenagers had started making faces at one of the guards, trying to get him to smile. The guard remained perfectly still, but Marcus could see the slight tension in his shoulders. Rex had noticed too. The dog's ears perked up and he turned his head toward the teenagers, his body language shifting to alertness. Marcus felt a surge of pride and anticipation. His months of planning and training were about to be put to the ultimate test. The following morning, Marcus returned to Buckingham Palace with Rex, this time prepared to act. Word had spread on social media about a particularly disrespectful incident the day before, and Marcus knew the guards would likely face even more harassment as tourists tried to recreate viral moments. As predicted, a larger crowd had gathered near the main gate. Marcus positioned himself about 50 meters away, close enough to intervene but far enough to avoid immediate suspicion. Rex sat calmly beside him, every muscle ready for action, despite his relaxed appearance. The situation escalated quickly. A middle-aged man with an expensive camera started shouting at one of the guards, demanding he turn his head for a better angle. When the guard remained motionless, the man grew more aggressive, stepping closer and waving his hands inches from the soldier's face. "Now, Rex," Marcus whispered, giving the signal they'd practiced hundreds of times. Rex moved with precision and purpose. He trotted directly toward the aggressive tourist, positioning himself between the man and the guard. The dog didn't bark or show aggression, but his presence was immediately commanding. At 70 pounds of solid muscle, Rex created an undeniable barrier. The tourist stepped back, confused. "Where did this dog come from?" he muttered, looking around for an owner. Rex remained perfectly still, mirroring the guard's stance, his dark eyes fixed on the man with quiet intensity. Other tourists began noticing the unusual scene. Some pulled out their phones, but now they were filming the remarkable dog rather than harassing the guard. The aggressive tourist, feeling foolish and outnumbered by the shifting crowd dynamics, packed up his camera and moved away. Marcus felt a surge of triumph, but he knew this was just the beginning. Over the next several weeks, he and Rex developed a routine. Every morning they would jog past different guard posts, observing and occasionally intervening when situations became inappropriate. Rex's reputation began growing among both tourists and guards. Videos of the mysterious protective dog started appearing on social media with captions like "Guard dog protects guard" and "Hero dog stands up for soldier." The positive attention was exactly what Marcus had hoped for, but success brought new challenges. Palace security had noticed the pattern and began investigating. Marcus realized he needed to be more careful and strategic about their interventions. He started varying their routes and timing, making their appearances seem more random and natural. During this time, Marcus also began noticing something remarkable about Rex's behavior. The dog seemed to understand the gravity and dignity of the guard's duty. When positioned near them, Rex would adopt a similar posture, standing tall and still, almost as if he recognized he was part of something important. Sarah, Rex's original trainer, was amazed by the reports Marcus shared during their weekly sessions. "He's not just following commands anymore," she observed. "Rex has internalized the mission. He genuinely seems to understand he's protecting these men." The breakthrough moment came on a particularly busy Saturday. Marcus and Rex were near the palace when a group of university students, clearly intoxicated from a night of partying, began a coordinated harassment campaign against multiple guards. They had obviously planned this, with different people taking videos while others created distractions. The situation was more complex than anything Rex had encountered. Multiple harassers, multiple guards, and a growing crowd of onlookers created chaos that threatened to spiral out of control. Marcus realized this was the ultimate test of everything they'd trained for. He gave Rex the signal, but this time added a new command they'd been working on in secret. Instead of positioning himself near just one guard, Rex began moving between all the targeted soldiers, creating a protective perimeter that disrupted the students' coordinated attack. The crowd's energy shifted dramatically. Instead of enjoying the spectacle of guards being harassed, people began watching in amazement as a single dog managed to defuse multiple confrontations simultaneously. The students, finding their viral video opportunity ruined by an unexpected Canine intervention eventually gave up and left. What happened next surprised even Marcus. One of the guards, a young man who couldn't have been more than 25, made the slightest nod toward Rex as the dog passed by his position. It was barely perceptible, a tiny break in protocol, but it was a clear acknowledgement and thanks. Marcus felt emotional seeing this small gesture. His plan was working better than he'd ever imagined. Rex wasn't just deterring harassment, he was creating moments of human connection and dignity in situations designed to strip both away. But Marcus also knew they were pushing boundaries. The palace security teams were definitely aware of them now, and it was only a matter of time before someone in authority would want answers about the mysterious dog and his owner, who seemed to appear whenever trouble arose. As they walked home that afternoon, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to operate in the shadows, perhaps it was time to be more direct about their mission. The guards deserved advocates who weren't afraid to stand up for them openly. He began planning a more public approach, not realizing that his decision would soon lead to the most challenging test Rex had ever faced. 3 months into their unofficial guardian routine, Marcus decided to take a bold step. He contacted several military veteran organizations and explained his mission, hoping to gain official support for what he and Rex were doing. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many veterans sharing their own stories of being disrespected while in uniform. Through these connections, Marcus learned about Sergeant James Mitchell, a former Queen's Guard who now worked as a liaison between the military and civilian communities. James agreed to meet Marcus at a coffee shop near Westminster Bridge on a cold Thursday morning. "What you're doing is remarkable," James said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "But you need to understand the delicate position this puts everyone in. The guards can't acknowledge Rex's help officially, and palace security is concerned about unauthorized animals near sensitive areas." Marcus leaned forward, his passion evident. "These men serve their country with honor, and tourists treat them like objects in a museum. Rex is just leveling the playing field, giving them the respect they deserve." James nodded slowly. "I understand your motivation, and frankly, many of us appreciate what you've been doing. But there are protocols and security concerns that go beyond simple harassment prevention. What if Rex reacts to someone who isn't actually a threat? What if his presence escalates a situation instead of calming it?" These were questions Marcus had wrestled with himself. Rex's training was extensive, but no system was perfect. The possibility of a misunderstanding or overreaction kept Marcus awake, at night sometimes. "I've been thinking about that," Marcus replied. "What if we could make this official somehow? Partner with palace security instead of working around them. Rex could be properly certified and integrated into existing protocols." James raised an eyebrow. "That's an interesting idea, but it would require approval from levels far above my pay grade. The Queen's Guard has traditions going back centuries. Introducing a dog into that framework would be unprecedented." Despite the challenges, James agreed to speak with his superiors about the possibility of some kind of official recognition or partnership. In the meantime, he advised Marcus to continue their work but to be more careful about avoiding security concerns. The conversation left Marcus feeling hopeful, but also anxious. Official recognition would legitimize their mission, but it might also impose restrictions that could limit Rex's effectiveness. Over the next few weeks, Marcus noticed increased attention from palace security personnel. They weren't being stopped or questioned, but it was clear they were being monitored more closely. Rex seemed to sense the added scrutiny and became more alert during their visits. The situation came to a head on a busy Sunday afternoon. Marcus and Rex were near St. James's Palace when they witnessed an incident that would test every aspect of their training and Marcus's judgment. A group of protesters had gathered near the palace gates, initially peaceful, but growing increasingly agitated. Their demonstration was about military spending, and some members began directing their anger toward the guards on duty, seeing them as symbols of what they opposed. The situation was different from typical tourist harassment. These people were politically motivated, organized, and genuinely angry. As their chants grew louder and more aggressive, some protesters began approaching the guards directly, shouting accusations and demanding responses. Marcus watched nervously as the crowd dynamics shifted. This wasn't simple disrespect or ignorance. This was targeted political anger being directed at soldiers who couldn't defend themselves or explain their positions. The guards remained perfectly disciplined, but the tension was escalating rapidly. When one protester began jabbing his finger inches from a guard's face while screaming about military murderers, Marcus knew he had to act. But this situation was far more volatile than anything Rex had encountered before. "Easy, boy," Marcus whispered as they approached. Rex was already tense, sensing the angry energy in the crowd. This wasn't the playful harassment of tourists trying to get a reaction. This was genuine hostility that could turn dangerous quickly. Marcus gave the signal and Rex moved toward the confrontation. But something was different this time. The protesters saw the dog approaching and began shouting about police dogs and military intimidation tactics. They assumed Rex was an official security measure, which made them even angrier. The crowd began pressing closer to both the guard and Rex, with some protesters now focusing their anger on the dog. "Get that attacked dog away from us," someone shouted. This is peaceful protest. Marcus realized with growing horror that Rex's presence was escalating rather than diffusing the situation. The protesters' anger was now divided between the guard and what they perceived as an attempt to intimidate them with a police dog. Rex, sensing the increased aggression directed at him, began showing signs of stress. His training had prepared him for protecting guards from individual harassers, not managing a hostile crowd that saw him as part of the problem. Marcus knew he had to make a split-second decision: continue with Rex's protective positioning and risk the situation spinning completely out of control, or try something completely different that went against everything they'd trained for. In that moment, with tensions reaching a breaking point, and Rex looking to him for guidance, Marcus realized that sometimes the most protective thing you can do is exactly the opposite of what seems obvious. He was about to give Rex a command that contradicted everything they'd worked toward, but it might be the only way to save the situation. The next few seconds would determine whether months of training had prepared them for this moment, or whether Marcus was about to make the biggest mistake of their partnership. With the crowd's anger reaching a dangerous peak, and Rex caught in the middle of a situation spiraling out of control, Marcus made a decision that went against every instinct and month of training. Instead of commanding Rex to maintain his protective stance, he called out the one command they'd practiced but never used in the field. "Rex, play dead," Marcus shouted over the noise of the angry crowd. The German shepherd immediately dropped to the ground, rolling onto his side with his tongue hanging out in a perfect imitation of unconsciousness. The effect was instantaneous and completely unexpected. The protesters stopped mid-shout, confused by the sudden sight of what they thought was an aggressive police dog now lying motionless on the pavement. Concerned murmurs rippled through the crowd as people tried to understand what had just happened. "Is the dog okay?" someone asked. "Did someone hurt him?" Marcus quickly stepped forward, kneeling beside Rex with apparent concern. "I think he got overwhelmed by all the shouting," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "He's just a rescue dog, not used to big crowds." The crowd's energy shifted dramatically. Instead of facing an intimidating police dog, they were now looking at what appeared to be a frightened pet who had fainted from stress. Several protesters, despite their anger at the military, showed genuine concern for Rex's welfare. "Should we call a vet?" one woman asked, her political anger temporarily forgotten in the face of apparent animal distress. Marcus continued his performance, gently stroking Rex's fur while the dog maintained his lifeless pose. "He should be okay in a few minutes. This happens sometimes when he gets scared. I shouldn't have brought him so close to all the excitement." The guard, still maintaining his rigid posture, couldn't react officially, but Marcus caught a brief flicker of amazement in the soldier's eyes. In less than 30 seconds, Rex had transformed from a perceived threat into an object of sympathy, completely defusing the confrontation. As the crowd's attention focused on Rex's apparent condition, the original anger toward the guard began to dissipate. People started backing away to give the unconscious dog space, and the aggressive finger-pointing and shouting stopped entirely. Marcus waited a full 2 minutes before gently shaking Rex's shoulder. "Come on, boy. Wake up." Rex slowly opened. His eyes lifted his head and looked around with perfectly feigned confusion, as if he had no idea where he was or what had happened. The crowd actually applauded as Rex slowly got to his feet, his tail wagging weakly. Several protesters reached out to pet him, their anger completely forgotten in their relief that the dog was apparently okay. "Maybe we should move our demonstration away from here," suggested one of the protest leaders. "We don't want to stress the poor thing again." The group began relocating to a different area, their confrontation with the guard completely abandoned. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus and Rex slowly walked away, both maintaining the pretense that the dog was still recovering from his episode. It wasn't until they were several blocks away that Marcus finally knelt down and gave Rex the biggest hug of his life. "That was brilliant, boy. Absolutely brilliant." Rex's tail wagged enthusiastically, clearly proud of his performance and happy to have successfully completed such an unusual command. Marcus realized they had stumbled onto something revolutionary. Rex's traditional protective stance worked well against individual harassers, but this new approach could be even more effective in complex situations. By appearing vulnerable instead of threatening, Rex could manipulate crowd dynamics in ways that direct confrontation never could. Over the next few weeks, Marcus began incorporating this new strategy into Rex's training. They practiced the play, dead command in various scenarios, with Rex learning to gauge when vulnerability might be more effective than strength. The results were remarkable. In situations where Rex's protective presence might escalate tensions, his apparent collapse would instantly shift everyone's focus and emotional energy. Instead of seeing an obstacle to their harassment, people would see an innocent animal in distress, triggering protective instincts that overrode their desire to bother the guards. News of the fainting guard dog began spreading through social media, but the coverage was entirely positive. People shared videos of Rex recovering from his episodes with comments about how sweet and sensitive he was. Nobody suspected that his collapses were strategic rather than genuine. Marcus also noticed that the guards themselves seemed to appreciate this new approach. While they couldn't acknowledge Rex directly, he began noticing more subtle signs of approval and even what seemed like slight smiles when Rex performed his dramatic collapses. The strategy worked so well that Marcus started wondering if they should make it their primary approach. But he also realized they were walking a fine line. The success depended on people believing Rex's episodes were genuine, and that deception made Marcus slightly uncomfortable. His concerns deepened when Sergeant James Mitchell contacted him for another meeting. James had heard about the incident at St. James's Palace through military channels, and he had questions about what had really happened. "That was some coincidence," James said over coffee, his eyes studying Marcus carefully. "Rex happening to faint right when that crowd was getting aggressive." Marcus maintained innocence, but he could see that James wasn't entirely convinced. The former guard was too experienced to believe in convenient coincidences, especially when they involved a dog with Rex's training and reputation. "Dogs are sensitive creatures," Marcus replied carefully. "Rex has had some trauma in his past. Loud, angry crowds can trigger stress responses." James nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he suspected there was more to the story. "Well, whatever happened, it worked out well for everyone involved. The guard was grateful, and the protesters got to express their views without anyone getting hurt." Marcus left that meeting with mixed feelings. Their new strategy was incredibly effective, but it required a level of deception that made him question whether they were still operating with the same noble intentions that had started their mission. That evening, as he sat with Rex in their small flat, Marcus found himself wondering if success had led them down a path that compromised their original principles. Were they still protecting guards with honor and integrity? Or had they become manipulators, using people's emotions against them? The question would soon become more than philosophical, as events were about to unfold that would test not just Rex's abilities, but Marcus's character in ways he never expected. Marcus's internal struggle about their methods intensified when he received an unexpected phone call on a rainy Tuesday evening. The caller identified himself as Commander Richard Thornton from the Metropolitan Police, and he wanted to meet immediately. "We know what you've been doing, Mr. Henderson," the commander said without preamble when they met at a quiet pub in South London. "We've been monitoring your activities around the royal palaces for some time now." Marcus's heart sank. He had always known this moment might come, but he wasn't prepared for how exposed he felt sitting across from this stern-faced police officer. "I haven't broken any laws," he said defensively. "No, you haven't," Commander Thornton agreed. "Surprising, Marcus. In fact, what you've accomplished is remarkable. Rex has prevented dozens of incidents that could have escalated into serious security concerns. The guards appreciate what you're doing, even if they can't say so officially." Marcus relaxed slightly, but remained wary. "So what's this about then?" The commander leaned forward, his expression serious. "We have a problem, and we think you and Rex might be uniquely qualified to help solve it. There's a group of extremists planning something significant targeting the Queen's Guard. Our intelligence suggests they want to provoke an incident that would embarrass the monarchy and generate negative international publicity." This was far beyond anything Marcus had imagined when he started training Rex. "What kind of incident?" "They're planning a coordinated harassment campaign designed to push one of the guards past their breaking point. If they succeed in making a guard abandon protocol or react violently, they'll have footage they can use to portray the military as unstable or aggressive. It could damage the reputation of the entire institution." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The thought of someone deliberately trying to destroy a guard's career and dignity for political purposes made him angry, but it also highlighted how unprepared he and Rex were for this level of organized threat. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked. "Surely palace security can handle something like this better than a construction worker and his dog." Commander Thornton smiled grimly. "Traditional security measures might actually make the situation worse. If uniformed officers intervene, it plays into their narrative about military oppression of free speech. But a concerned dog owner with his pet? That's different. That's exactly the kind of organic civilian response that could diffuse their entire strategy." The weight of what the commander was asking began to sink in. This wasn't about stopping tourists from taking inappropriate photos anymore. This was about protecting the integrity of an institution from organized attack. "When is this supposed to happen?" Marcus asked. "Tomorrow morning. They've chosen the changing of the guard ceremony at Buckingham Palace. Maximum visibility, maximum potential for international embarrassment if things go wrong." Marcus spent a sleepless night considering the request. Rex sensed his anxiety and stayed close, occasionally pressing against his leg in comfort. By morning, Marcus had made his decision. They couldn't stand by and watch someone deliberately try to destroy a guard's career and reputation. The changing of the guard ceremony always drew large crowds, making it easy for Marcus and Rex to blend in with the tourists. But as they positioned themselves near the palace gates, Marcus spotted the extremists almost immediately. They stood out because of their overly casual behavior and the way they kept checking their phones, clearly coordinating their actions. Rex noticed them too, his body language alerting Marcus to their aggressive energy, even though they hadn't done anything yet. The dog's training had taught him to read human intentions, and these people radiated hostile purpose. The ceremony began with its usual pomp and precision. The guards marched in perfect formation while tourists snapped photos and children pointed in wonder. Everything appeared normal, but Marcus could feel the tension building as the extremists prepared to execute their plan. When the guards took their positions, the harassment began. But this wasn't random or spontaneous like the incidents Marcus and Rex had handled before. This was calculated psychological warfare designed to find each guard's breaking point. Different members of the group targeted different guards simultaneously, using personal insults, threats, and provocative political statements intended to trigger emotional responses. They had clearly researched how to push military personnel past their limits while staying technically within legal boundaries. Marcus watched in horror as one guard, barely out of his teens, began showing signs of stress under a barrage of attacks on his character, his family, and his service. The young man's jaw was clenched tight, and small beads of sweat were forming on his forehead despite the cool morning air. This was the moment Marcus and Rex had been preparing for, but the stakes had never been higher. One wrong move could play directly into the extremists' hands. One misstep could turn Rex from a protector into a propaganda tool for people who wanted to harm everything he represented. Marcus realized that neither their traditional protective strategy nor their newer, vulnerable dog approach would work against this coordinated assault. The extremists were too organized and too focused to be deterred by Rex's presence or distracted by his apparent distress. Standing there in the crowd, watching a young soldier being systematically broken down by people who saw his suffering as a political victory, Marcus understood that everything they had trained for had led to this moment. But he also realized that success would require something he had never taught Rex, something that couldn't be trained or practiced. It would require trusting Rex to understand not just commands or strategies, but the deeper meaning of their mission. In the next few minutes, Marcus would discover whether his dog was truly the guardian he believed him to be, or simply a well-trained animal following learned behaviors. The test of their partnership was about to begin, and failure would mean watching helplessly as someone's life and career were destroyed for the entertainment of a hostile crowd. As the extremists pressed their psychological assault on the young guard, Marcus found himself frozen by the complexity of the situation. Every strategy they had developed seemed inadequate against this level of organized cruelty. The harassment was too sophisticated to be disrupted by Rex's protective positioning, and the crowd was too focused to be distracted by his dramatic collapses. The young guard was visibly struggling now, his perfect military bearing beginning to crack under the relentless verbal attack. Marcus could see the internal battle playing out on the soldier's face as his training fought against his human need to defend himself. In that critical moment, Rex did something unprecedented. Without any command from Marcus, the dog walked calmly through the crowd until he stood directly in front of the harassed guard. Then, instead of facing the extremists or playing dead, Rex simply sat down and looked up at the soldier with quiet dignity. The effect was immediate and profound. The guard, who had been staring straight ahead in regulation fashion, found himself looking down into Rex's calm, understanding eyes. For just a moment, the soldier's expression softened, and some of the tension left his shoulders. The extremists faltered, confused by this unexpected development. They had prepared for security intervention, crowd disruption, even the guard's emotional breakdown, but they hadn't anticipated a dog that seemed to communicate empathy and solidarity without any apparent agenda. Rex remained perfectly still, not protecting or performing, just being present. His quiet companionship seemed to remind the guard that he wasn't alone, that someone understood his situation and respected his duty to remain silent. The crowd dynamics began shifting as other tourists noticed what was happening. Instead of watching harassment for entertainment, they were witnessing something touching and beautiful, a connection between a suffering human and a compassionate animal. "Look at that dog," someone whispered. "He knows the guard can't pet him, but he's staying anyway." More people began watching Rex instead of the extremists, whose carefully planned disruption was being upstaged by genuine emotion. Their attempts to continue the harassment felt increasingly cruel and petty, in contrast to the simple dignity of the scene playing out before them. Marcus watched in amazement as Rex demonstrated something beyond training or commands. The dog had intuited exactly what the situation needed, not protection or distraction, but witness and solidarity. He was showing the guard that his service was seen, respected, and valued by at least one being in the crowd. The extremists realized their plan was falling apart. Instead of footage of a guard losing control, they had video of a touching moment between a soldier and a dog. Instead of angry confrontation, they had created a scene that generated sympathy and respect for the military. One by one, they began backing away, their coordination broken and their narrative destroyed. Other tourists started applauding, not for any performance, but for the simple beauty of Rex's quiet support. The guard remained in perfect position, but Marcus could see gratitude in his eyes as he looked down at his unexpected companion. Rex stayed beside him for another 10 minutes until the formal ceremony concluded, then quietly rejoined Marcus in the crowd. Commander Thornton found Marcus later that afternoon. "That wasn't what we planned," he said, but his tone was admiring rather than critical. "Rex did something remarkable out there. He didn't just prevent an incident, he transformed it into something positive." Marcus nodded, still processing what had happened. He understood what the guard needed better than I did, better than anyone did. In the weeks that followed, the video of Rex's quiet vigil beside the harassed guard went viral for all the right reasons. Instead of propaganda for extremists, it became a symbol of compassion and respect for military service. Comments poured in from around the world, praising both the guard's professionalism and Rex's intuitive kindness. The incident also led to official recognition that Marcus had never expected. The palace issued a statement acknowledging Rex's positive impact on guard welfare and announcing a new program allowing certified therapy animals to work with military personnel dealing with public harassment. Rex became the first officially recognized guard guardian, with a special collar identifying his role and authorizing his presence near royal properties. More importantly, other dogs began training for similar roles, creating a network of four-legged protectors for soldiers who couldn't protect themselves. Marcus quit his construction job to work full-time with military welfare organizations, helping train other dogs and handlers. But he never forgot the lesson Rex had taught him that morning at Buckingham Palace. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to fight or perform or manipulate. Sometimes it's simply to show up, bear witness, and remind someone that they're not alone in their struggle. Rex continued his guardian duties well into his retirement years, but he never again needed to use the dramatic strategies Marcus had taught him. His quiet presence and intuitive understanding of human dignity proved more effective than any training or command. The extremists never attempted another coordinated harassment campaign. They had learned, as Marcus had, that true strength doesn't come from forcing reactions or breaking down others. It comes from standing beside those who serve with honor, offering solidarity without asking for anything in return. In the end, a rescue dog with behavioral problems had become exactly what Marcus first envisioned, a guardian for those who guard others. But Rex had achieved this not through aggression or trickery, but through the simple power of compassionate presence. Years later, when people asked Marcus about the secret to Rex's success, his answer was always the same. "I trained him to protect the guards, but he taught himself to understand them. That made all the difference."